Namaste. So another story, or associated with Christ, since we are talking of on Easter Friday, is about resurrection. It is said that after 3 days, Christ, they took the dead body and kept it in a cave. After 3 days, he was again alive and appeared before others, saying that he is the same person in flesh and blood, so on and so forth. Now, there are ways people interpret this story or try to explain it. But the issue is not that. What really is resurrection? Resurrection literally means dropping off of the old and emergence of the new. That's exactly what resurrection means. So, Christ death of the physical body, but being born to eternal life, essentially means that in all of us, the dropping off of the old self, the old consciousness, and the emergence of the new. And those who are on the path of yoga experience it not once but several times. Suddenly, a whole past drops and something new completely emerges. Now, here we have two processes, and that's what we see Mother describing in this beautiful little conversation: resurrection. Resurrection means for us. So, as I said, in the Christian world, resurrection means Christ's death and his reappearance. He comes alive again. But obviously, the story has a symbolic, deeper sense than simply the physical body coming up again. Resurrection means for us the falling off of the old consciousness. But it is not only a rebirth, a sudden change which completely breaks with the past. So you see, it is not rebirth. In rebirth, also the same thing happens, that our old consciousness drops off, we go through a state of oblivion, and then we are reborn in better, at least inwardly better state to carry on the journey forward. But what is resurrection? It's not exactly rebirth, but in the same body, there is a certain continuity in it between dying to your old self, your low exterior nature, and starting quite anew. It's a marvelous experience that suddenly one day you are in a certain state of consciousness, caught in the grip of a certain kind of old nature which is troubling you, exhausting you in every way. And suddenly the entire thing collapses like a building, magic building which is undone. That is the experience of resurrection. So here she describes it: dying to your old self, your low exterior nature, and starting quite anew. In the experience of resurrection, the movement of discarding the old being is closely connected with that of rising up from it of the new consciousness and the new strength. So it's not only that suddenly perception changes, vision changes, understanding changes, but there is even a new strength to face or be with life. It's an amazing experience. And that's why in yoga it is said that we must go through life, especially the journey of yoga, with faith and endurance. If we have these two things, but the passage is there, like you see with Christ's story, the passage is there full of crown of thorns, whiplashes, doubts, all kinds of doubts. Satan comes and tells him, jump from the tower because you believe that God will protect you. Why don't you jump from the tower? And Christ says very correctly, he says beautifully that, one must not tempt the Lord my God. That's not what it means, that I'll do a most stupid thing like this. And that's not what it means, that, God will protect us. So there are 3 times, he tries to bring in doubt. Even Christ at one place says that, why have you forsaken me? Why have you brought me to this impasse? This is old consciousness. And then he finally goes to the cross. Now what is that cross? Cross is where the old nature is crucified. That's how Sri Aurobindo puts in one of the aphorism, that the soul knows that the ego must be crucified. So, what is the crucifixion of egos? Imagine everybody mocking at you, or somebody mocking at you, or anybody, or mocking at you, and even completely you are put along with the thief, 2 thieves slain by his side. And that is where the ego is ultimately being chipped, pulverized to a point where if one can endure with faith, then the new will rise out of it. But if we don't have the endurance, then we break down. These are the two options. When we break down, then it is rebirth. Ultimately, evolution will take place. But when we break down in the process, declare that God doesn't exist, start complaining, grumbling, then all kinds of forces enter. And we are done for in a particular life. Then in the next life, we come back. Ultimately, evolution takes place. But it's a lot of loss of time, wastage of energy, and we have to go through the same process in some way or the other again. That's why the mother says that especially suicide should never be done. Go through the passage. Why? Because if you have left something undone, even Ishopanishad speaks about it. If you have left something undone, be sure that difficulty, especially those who commit suicide, try to cut their lives short, you will face the same difficulty in a much greater way. Because why much greater way? Because this is exactly how nature operates. It'll pulverize it to a point where you ultimately yield in and say, it's no more in my hands, Lord, do something about it. So it's always a good idea to go through what one has to go through it with complete faith in the Lord, in the divine, and endure through the process. There is no second option. The second option is a more difficult option. So this is the first option. It should be the last option. So if we can do it with sufficient faith, whatever time it takes, whether we see the story of Ramayana, Krishna, Devaki, all these stories, Christ as we are speaking of course Mother and Sri Aurobindo, years, decades. Look at Mother and Sri Aurobindo, decades. From 1926 to 1956, in between even Sri Aurobindo withdraws from the limits of our physical senses, which we call as the departure. But eventually, truth will win. That's what is meant. When it is said, Satyameva Jayate Nanritam, it means don't fix the time, but have the faith that truth will manifest. Nothing can stop it from manifesting. So this is exactly what resurrection means, that while we are still there, the old drops off and the new emerges. So it is something very beautiful rather than rebirth. In the experience of resurrection, the movement of discarding the old being is closely connected with that of the rising up from it, of the new consciousness and the new strength. This new consciousness is in general sense. It's not about the supramental consciousness, but every time we are born anew. And that's why initiation is known as new birth. Initiation is not about a mechanical process. Suddenly, there is a flash, and you suddenly feel that a path is opened before you and a goal is clear, and this is the journey. It's not that the old finishes, but suddenly you are as if entered round a bend, which you thought was the end, and you see a new journey begins. This is what is the experience of a new birth. So that from what is thrown off, the best can unite in a new creation with what has succeeded. So there is not much wastage in the process. Much will go away, but even in the worst state, there is something like we'll see it in some of these stories, very interesting, that there is love which has taken a very distorted form. There is a very beautiful article of a short essay of Nalnida, where he says, Ravana's, what happens to him? He says, Ravana's death is actually a conversion of the Asura from the opponent of Rama to a Bhakta of Rama. He regains that status from where he had fallen. He was a Bhakta of Vishnu. So this is what it means, that there is a kind of conversion, but something is picked up. Rama and Ravana was all the time remembering Rama. That part is picked up, that little core. But it is changed from an opponent into a Bhakta of the Lord. So this way, love with all the distortions, but that little kernel of truth is picked up and changed into something much more beautiful than what human beings can conceive. So that from what is thrown off, the best can unite in a new creation with what has succeeded. The true significance of resurrection is that the divine consciousness awakes from the unconsciousness into which it has gone down and lost itself. the divine consciousness becomes once more aware of itself in spite of its descent into the world of death, night, and obscurity. So it has entered, and Sri Aurobindo took a much deeper plunge. What we call as withdrawal actually went right into the heart of the inconscience. And then when it plunges out of it in that glorified body, that's what is meaning of resurrection. That significance of 5th December we have not yet completely understood. It means the body can hold the supramental light and power. For so long it held that power. And it prepared the way for the supramental manifestation which took place on 29th February. That world of obscurity is darker even than our physical night. If you came up after plunging into it, you would actually find the most impenetrable night clear. This is a true experience to be had. You go through a state of utter inconscience when one is walking on the edge of death. One almost feels that perhaps that's the end of the road, and even perhaps death is better. But stay on, hold on. Don't yield to the temptation of the Satan saying, you believe in God, throw yourself. Don't do that. If you cannot walk, stay. Stay just firm with nothing else but faith. Best is aspiration. If aspiration is dimmed, faith. If faith is dimmed, hope. If even hope is dimmed, just cling to something or someone who represents for us the divine. And that is the divine name. Mechanically. Ma, whatever one has faith in. Just hold on to that. So if one doesn't yield to the temptation of throwing the body into the abyss, as we see in the story of Christ, if you came up after plunging into it, you would actually find the most impenetrable night clear. Just as returning from the true light of the divine consciousness, the supramental light without obscurity, you would find the physical sun black. This experience is very common. I'll tell you how. We don't go to supramental light, so one will say, how is this experience common? Many people who have lived here, come here, after they have stayed for 1 week, they do not realize what's happening. It's nice, very good, nice place, samadhi is very good. When they go out from here, suddenly they feel a sharp contrast. Where am I going? See, that's the closest glimpse one can have. Or if one is so fortunate, blessed by the grace to have had the contact with the divine consciousness within, and then it is veiled, then one knows one is like a fish without water. And yet the divine does all this to open here, there, everywhere, so that there is a wide opening. But that is the experience. Just like after having contacted the divine in whatever way, you come back to life, the same life which looked very beautiful, where one was enjoying, suddenly becomes tasteless, insipid. And the reverse is also true, that suddenly to enter into it, people often ask, what is there in Pondicherry? Why do you go? You cannot explain. And if they say why, the weather is very pleasant. No, it's quite hot. Temperature is 35, 36, 37, I don't know how much. Very humid. People, okay, lesser said. People of Pondicherry are very nice, by the way. All said and done. Very nice people. Local people, very nice. And all this, still, you may have no amenities, very little amenities, and say, why are you coming back? Because you feel that suddenly that from the old self you have transited to the new self. And then once that stamp is there, going back and coming, one day that old self drops off. So he says, but even in the depths of that supreme darkness, the lesson to be taken from resurrection, even in that state of utter agonizing moment when the ego is being crucified completely, yet there is hope, there is a light. That light emerges victorious and successful. If we look at that moment, it looked like the Roman Empire has succeeded. But today, who remembers the lineage of Roman Empire? But everybody remembers Christ. So here comes that final word. But even in the depths of that supreme darkness, the supreme light lies hidden. So, however dark that state may be, there is light somewhere there. I cannot see it, it's okay, but light is seeing me. That's the function of light. Let that light and that consciousness awaken in you. Let there be the great resurrection.